Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you are new to the show, please hit that subscribe button. Also consider becoming a YouTube member, a Patreon, or donate a small amount given in the link in the description box. Let me welcome our guest tonight, Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff is a renowned American economist, a Marxist, and a popular analyst. Professor Wolff, welcome back to India and Global Left.
My pleasure. Glad to be back.
I wanted to start with the war. I want to focus with the war, and maybe a good way to start out is to hear your thoughts about what's your analysis about the war so far, and then maybe I'll ask my follow-up questions.
Well, I have come to believe about this war what I have come to believe about quite a many of the urgent economic issues that I've been asked to deal with over the last several years. And so let me begin with that answer. The United States is now going through an earlier stage of the collapse of its empire than the British have had to go through over the last century. So there's a particular poignancy in talking to you and to talking to an audience in South Asia about this, because you have been crucial to the decline and end of the British Empire because of the role of India over all those years. And so, in a way, I'm appealing to your understanding of how your history was wrapped up for a while in the decline of the British Empire. Well, the war in Iran and many other things, the destruction of the North Atlantic Alliance, the collapse of the relationship between the United States on the one hand and its two neighbors, Canada and Mexico, on the other. Many of these phenomena, the decline of the dollar as global currency, these are associated with, they are symptoms of the decline of this empire. It's a decline that is irreversible in my judgment. It has been going on slowly for the last 30 years, but in the last decade, it has accelerated. And that's partly because the Western capitalism never really recovered from the crash of 2008 and 9. The effort to do so was badly interrupted by the pandemic, the COVID-19. But even without that, what you're watching is the rise of China, India, Brazil, and so on, a relentless process of much more rapid economic growth than the West can achieve. I mean, just to give you an example, last year, 2025, the United States grew a little over 2%. The Chinese economy grew about 5%. It doesn't matter whether the numbers are exactly correct. These are rough indicators. But the relationship of more than 2 to 1, that tells you all that you need to know. And India had an even bigger rate of growth. So the gap there was even larger. You can't have this year in and year out over 30 years, which we have had, and not radically alter the economic scene, the situation. I'll give you one more example, then I'll stop. Every country in the world and almost every corporation active in the global economy is rethinking everything because we no longer have a situation where the vast majority of countries, if they're looking for a trading partner, if they're looking for an investment partner, if they're looking for a grant of any kind for anything, normally went to London or New York or Paris and now they still go there, but instead of coming home to Asia, Africa, Latin America, they go from London, Paris, and New York to Beijing, New Delhi, and Sao Paulo. Why? Because they can make the same presentation there and for several years now get a better deal, get a loan at lower interest, get an investment with better conditions, on and on. And this is a kind of small, daily, all the time movement that you can miss if you're looking for the big event. But it is more important than the big event. And all this leads me to say much of what the leadership of the West, particularly American, has had to do is try somehow to cope with the decline. And the mechanism of coping has been denial. I cannot stress this enough. We just had a presidential election here in the United States, a little over a year ago. None of the candidates, not Biden, not Harris, not Trump, said one word ever about empire decline. The idea was taboo. You couldn't say it, and they haven't said it since. You will not hear it. In fact, Mr. Trump clearly has decided that what he is going to do is demonstrate that the United States empire is not only not declining, but he is going to, unbelievable in the 21st century, he's going to expand it. He is going to take back Panama. He is going to take Greenland. He is going to threaten Canada. We could go on, Cuba. And now he's going to go to war against Iran, confident that we can expand no matter what. We are the empire of empires. This is such a classic story that I can write the last chapter that we're not at yet. And the last chapter will read like the last chapter of so many other empires. In their decline, they overreached. They misunderstood the limits which were closing in on them, and they made one effort too many. I am not yet sure that one effort too many is Iran. But the important thing I can do is tell you that it might be. And that alone, that it might be, tells you where we are. Whatever the outcome in Iran, the United States can't do what it did before. It didn't even understand in its rush to negate the declining empire hypothesis. They didn't even properly prepare. And so we are now flooded. I'm sitting here in New York City. We are flooded with information of lack of preparation for the attack on Iran. This was made out of political calculations and not done even into the level of capacity that the United States has.
I was struck by your parallels with the British Empire and its last days, and that's very obvious in many ways, given the British Empire was the last great quote unquote or the most expansive empire. But I was also curious about a striking difference, which says that in the 1940s, the British Empire was kind of in a defensive. It was a war that was imposed on it by Germany and, primarily by Germany and how it unfolded in Japan and elsewhere. But the US empire is kind of different, given at its very weak point, it is frailing around and it is imposing wars after wars on other nations. I wonder what's your take on that?
Well, I think the leadership of the United States would argue with you. And I'm not so sure that they're wrong about it. I usually mock them. You know, if you listen closely to President Trump, he tells a story as if the United States was afflicted by the world that doesn't behave properly. If you remember, his tariffs are justified because the world has cheated. The word that he uses, the world has cheated in the realm of economic trade and investment and exploited the United States. I mean, he has turned the world upside down. He doesn't want to understand even how the vast majority of Americans understand the period after World War II is given names like the unipolar moment or the American empire or the dominance or the American century. It has always been understood, as you put it, as being strong. And for most of the second half of the 20th century, it was strong. But it has had a constant drumbeat now of at least 15 years. And you know, nowadays time goes quickly. But for the last 15 years, everything comes together to suggest what? The decline of the empire. So the irony is you either have to accept that or you have to negate it. There's not really much in between. And the only people willing to accept it are the critics so far, and mostly the critics from the left in this country, because the critics from the right won't admit that the United States is declining. The closest they'll come is to attack the rest of the world, to blame it for every problem. And what are the problems? I really need to explain this to people. The American economy is in the worst shape of my lifetime. I was born here. You can see from my gray hair, I've been around a while. This is catastrophic. For example, my students, because I still teach at the university, have a very difficult time getting a good job. When I came out of the university, it never occurred to me that I wouldn't get a good job. I might not get the job of my dreams, but I would get a good job. I would be able, if I wished, to get married. I would be able to have children. I would. My students don't believe any of that because it's unrealistic. They can't do it. You know, the Democratic Party is running on one platform. It's called affordability. That's a silly word that they invented so that they can say that the economy is in terrible shape without having to say that because they too are busy denying. So they have to come up with some circumlocution about affordability as if there were some sort of condition that fell on the people like rain on a cloudy day. You know, this is childish. But what the Republicans are counting on is nothing short of an explosive increase in colonialism, in a kind of we don't care about the rules based international order. You know, no admission that the rules based were the US rules because it was an empire. No, no, pretending that this was some sort of neutral arrangement, which they are now rejecting. This is theater. This is all fakery. The fact of the matter is, and you know, you and I might disagree. The fact of the matter is, I think England or Britain would have tried to hold on to India if they could. I think the credit goes to the Indians. Yes, the British, having fought a war, were weaker and all of that. But let's be honest, World Wars One and Two were the end product of a competition among European empires. They lost their right to be the center of the world, the Europeans, because that's how they culminated their struggle. They took over every corner of the world: Belgium, Holland, the United States, Britain, France, and they ended up destroying one another, literally destroying one another, and thereby creating the space, not that they meant to, for China and India and a whole lot of other countries to finally get out from under and show that they can grow and they can develop and they can do high tech and all the rest that Europeans flattered themselves that they could do. There is a weakness, but it is covered over with an immense, thick ideological crust of pretense of being strong. Look, let me use the Iran as an example. Iran's Iran's way of dealing with American air power superiority. That's what the United States has: airplanes and missiles and all the rest of it. So the Iranians did two things apparently. Number one, really focus on intermediate range missiles and drones. Okay? Then they helped the Russians in the war in Ukraine and tested and developed their drones and their missiles. And then they took advantage, which of course they ought to, of their geography. They are a very big country and very mountainous. It's very easy to do two things. And by the way, I know nothing about military matters. So I'm not an expert, but I know enough to tell you the story I'm telling you now. So they knew that they could easily hide the drone centers and the missile silos in all those mountains. Even better, they could let the Americans see them doing it because from a distance, you can't tell whether what's going on is a real missile or a decoy missile. A missile that looks like a missile, but doesn't cost anything because it. So the United States, what can it do? It's going in there and bombing what? It doesn't know. Meanwhile, for the Iranians, they are surrounded by enemies that are located in obvious places. Israel is a very small country. You can throw anything there and it'll land and do damage because it's a densely populated small country. All the rest of the military threats are American military bases located in Bahrain or Qatar or the UAE or Oman or wherever. And everybody knows where they are. So the Iranians shoot them and know how to. You understand? They have figured out what? They have figured out how to overcome their disadvantages in the face of a country that has threatened them since the 1950s, when the U.S. overthrew Mossadegh in that revolution at that time engineered in the West. The Shah was the tool of the West. Everybody knows it. And ever since the Ayatollahs and the mullahs took over in the end of the 1970s, the United States has been an enemy. So they have had an immense time in which to focus on the. That's the story of the end of an empire. It's when the outer regions have finally figured out how to get out from under their subordination. And that's why I say to you, the mere fact that Iran might be the last chapter shows you that we are moving towards the last chapter, whatever happens in Iran. And the rest of the world is watching this, you know. And I'm not even going into what it might mean because it's not my tradition, so I don't know. But if you couple an attack, and if you couple an attack with a country's other arch enemy, Israel, and you begin by assassinating their religious slash political leader, you are mobilizing a country against you. So the United States is stuck. Even if it quote unquote wins, it will have a population that will be rebellious in 1,000 ways forever. What kind of victory is it? And the minute you ask that question, you discover that Mr. Trump has been very unclear about what he wants or what he will settle for. And that makes you wonder whether this was just done for the political advantage. With a weak economy, with a sex scandal around Mr. Epstein that I assume your audience is familiar with, he also needs, as political leaders often do, something to distract the population from the economy and from the Epstein scandal. And a war in Iran, even a poor one, even a losing one, gets you a distraction at least for a few days and weeks.
Yeah, I in fact agree with you that the British Empire would have liked to keep the empire if it could. I mean, ultimately, empires don't give up that easily because the actors within it, they are the beneficiaries. The British Indian civil servants, for instance, who ran the show in the subcontinent, they lived like kings, and there are great works on that, how
Yeah.
panicky they were, and how they until the last moment they didn't want to give up their jobs. Same is true for military because the subcontinent was extremely important to keep the Soviet Union on check, and also to protect its interest in West Asia. And so up until 1946, the British bombers were bombing the ports of Karachi and Mumbai when there were naval mutinies, great labor uprisings. This was post-war unrest in British India. Labor militancy was at all-time high globally, but also in the subcontinent, and then they were bombing. So I think you're absolutely spot on there. Professor Wolff, I wanted to ask you or focus this conversation a little bit on the US domestic economy, given all the analysis about the impact of the war are negative on the US economy. Consumer inflation, the oil refineries having to buy crude oil at probably double the prices by now. It went up to $120 per barrel. The impact on farm, because now is the season for soybean, uh, and the fertilizers come from through Persian Gulf, and fertilizer input prices are soaring up. Um, excuse me. Um, so, given and given yours and my interest in Marxian analysis, I wanted to ask you this because traditionally, Marxian analysis about American capitalism with regards to war has been that war is a solution to the kind of stagnancy, falling rate of profit, etc., because the war gives you the ability to mobilize public resources, state subsidies, and then the private contractors comes in, creates employment, and you get a way out of the falling rate of profit. Now that the war is raging on at a time when the US economy is not where it was in the 50s or the 60s or even 70s, but at its absolute low. Uh, it seems to me that the impact of the war on the economy is not a solution to the stagnancy, but it's going to be a death knell probably. So how does that affect the Marxian analysis about American capitalism with regards to war?
Well, you know, even with Keynesian analysis, as well as in Marxian analysis, you can ask a very basic question, which is what you've done. Let me just put it in slightly different words. if you have typical capitalist excess capacity, in other words, you suffer from an economy, which all capitalist economies do, from the fact that you only hire workers if and when it's profitable to do so. Profit is the rule, profit is the measure of your success. And therefore, no capitalist is going to invest higher work. Now, for the society as a whole, to have millions of people unemployed and to have huge portions of productive capacity sitting, doing nothing, is the height of irrationality. Those people want a job, and we need to give them one, and we need the output for them to enjoy the income that you get if you work. So, socially, the problem of capitalism, we need not to observe the profit rule because it is leaving us. I'll give you an example. The Federal Reserve measures that right now, something on the order of a fifth to a quarter of productive capacity in the United States is sitting idle. That's the Federal Reserve, not a left wing institution. So that's their measure. We have an official unemployment rate of 4.4%. That means, with all the problems of that number, but if you have a labor force of 170 million, which we do, and if you have a 4.4% unemployment, that means 8 million people are unemployed officially. So we have 8 million people who want jobs, and we have, let's say, 20% of our tools, equipment, and raw materials available for them to work with and on. But profit prevents this from being, nobody can make a profit, so it doesn't happen. So, what happens with war is that war can be, doesn't have to be, but war can be the irrational solution for this problem in capitalism. It doesn't say capitalism can solve its problems because you have the irony, which people in America know very well, that the way to get out of a horrible downturn in your economy in this country is to go and kill a lot of people, your own people, foreign people. You put it, in World War II in 1940, 41, you took millions of unemployed, which the system had not been able to find work for, put half of them in a uniform, and put the other half to work in factories making the uniform. Okay, you solved the problem, but you solved it in a project of killing. Now, that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second thing is this only works if your system has enough capacity to respond to the government's spending of money on the war. You know, we had that problem in the United States. We had no space for a lot of excess capacity. Today, we have even less space for a different reason. It wasn't that our economic industry hadn't developed far enough. We had developed very well, but it was that our industry now has left the United States, gone to India and gone to China and gone to Brazil and all the rest of it. So we have limitations, literally, of industrial capacity. That is why, even before the war, when you took normal monetary policy and pumped money into the system, which is really what you're doing when you hire for war, too, you're pumping money into the system. Why? Again, a footnote: the United States dares not raise taxes to pay for wars because even now, with the Iran war, even in the first week, the majority of all polls indicates that the majority of Americans are against this war. Normally, in the early phase of a war, you have the patriotic blah blah blah, and it takes a while. Not now. Right now, it is clear that a majority don't want it. With our limited industrialization, because we have emptied out our industries, what we've already learned we should keep in our minds. If you suddenly pump in money, that money is not going to go into jobs and production because the profit isn't there. So where does it go? Here's the beauty: stock market. That's where the money funnel in, and then it all gets taken. I'm exaggerating, but most of it gets taken over to the stock market. So we do have inflation, not in the real economy, but in the stock market. We didn't have that in World War II. The money spent for that war was heading into the real economy. And that meant we had a crisis because so much of the industrial capacity had to be shifted to the war that the only way to handle the drop in supplies of consumer goods was to do something which, as Marxists, we ought to enjoy. The United States stopped the market. The inefficiency of the market was such a barrier that Roosevelt, the president, declared no more market transactions. We are going to print coupon books and hand them out to Americans. And if you want to buy, there was a whole list of commodities, basic things: meat, sugar, milk, gasoline for your car, a whole bunch of basic commodities. You had to have a coupon ticket printed by the government. Any storekeeper who sold you a quart of milk for money would be arrested and put in jail. That was a crime. So, and what did the government do? It distributed coupon books according to your family's needs. If you had small children in your household, you got more tickets for milk. If you were an older couple, you didn't get any tickets for milk, etc., etc. In other words, the market was removed as the distributor, and the government came in and distributed coupon tickets. You will enjoy this, each according to their need. And it was the moment when the system couldn't handle it. That's our problem now. Even if you spend a fortune of money, we now have the problem that will be siphoned off into the stock market for all the usual reasons. But number two, we have the World War II problem in a different form. We don't have the capacity to produce a lot more. And that is going to make inflationary pressures very quickly show up if that money does try to go into the mainstream. And that is revolution here, because you have used up that capacity. That's another thing that, if I could comment on your point, you're right, but the conditions have changed. In the American conditions, you've been borrowing too much money for too long, and you're not in the position you once were to turn to the world with the most dynamic economy in the world, with the most secure capitalism in the world, and then borrow, and everybody was happy to lend to you. You know, if you wanted to cause trouble in India, you'd go look at the richest people in India and ask how much of their wealth is held in the United States, and it would get you depressed because it's a lot. And that's true everywhere else, not just India. But we have been borrowing too much money because we can't solve our problems. And we no longer have, for example, the AAA credit rating from Standard and Poor and Moody's and Fitch. It's all dropped to 2. All 3 of them have dropped it. What does that mean? It means you can't borrow the way you used to. If you're going to borrow a lot, you're going to have to pay higher interest rates. But you can't have higher interest rates because that'll bring you a recession here, and that's too politically dangerous. That's the reality. So even if they wanted to, by the way, we're going to see this experiment. In order to counter the declining empire, Mr. Trump, I hope this is known in India, has proposed that the military budget, now called the Department of War instead of Department of Defense, the military budget is to be increased from $900 billion this year to $1.5 trillion next year. That's an increase of 600 billion on a base of 900 billion. That's a two-thirds increase. All right. What is he saying? He's saying what his military have told him. If you want to take Panama, Iran, Greenland, Canada, you don't have the military to do that. Not even close. Okay, but he was also supposed to improve the credit rating. He can't. Tariffs were supposed to raise the money to fund the defense expenditure. But all tariffs raised was 150 billion, and they're now unconstitutional, so he can't do that anymore. Well, he hasn't solved that problem. He can't go to war and without solving these problems. And even if he could, he'd have a whole new set of problems because of the problems that he's inherited. The debt, which is too big, the lack of an industrial base, which is too far gone now. Americans are acutely aware that the American automobile industry is in its final years. It's done. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler finished. The future is BYD out of China and all that. Everybody sees it. Everybody somewhere knows it. And so, again, I don't mean to beat the horse, but what you're watching is the twisting and turning of a desperate leadership of a dying empire. And they're making one desperate effort after another, and that's not going to end well.
Keynes himself assumed that the solution of spending, I mean, he once said in general theory that perhaps it would need a war, and that's what it happened. But to sort of plug in that kind of constant leakage that couldn't match the supply demand. But yes, there was this assumption that he was talking about an industrial economy, and that's what I think sort of you explained in greater detail, that we are living under a finance economy where this kind of war is not going to help even the imperial core, because there isn't just the supply chain. I mean, the shipping, the investment in labor to make the industries ready, energy routes, etc., all of these things are not there. So even if you print money, as you rightly said, you can't raise tax, so you print money and this money go into the stock market, and as Raytheon and Boeing and other stock went up, it goes into the pockets of the big fat shareholders.
And
I
that's our economy. Let me drive it home a little bit. It is very clever, let me use that word. It's very clever politically to let the system function this way. Why? Well, the richest 10% of Americans, we have those studies, the richest 10% own about 80% of the shares of the stock market. Okay, that means if you have managed, without doing it intentionally, but if you've managed to arrange for the money you pump in to produce an inflation in the stock market, you're making the richest 10% of your people very happy. Their wealth keeps going up. The monthly statement they get from the stockbroker who handles their portfolio says you now have $80,000 more than you had a month ago. and you now you can go out to dinner and really splurge in the restaurant, and all the rest of it. And who are these top 10%? They're the leading politicians. They're the people who own the mass media. They're the people. For them, and I know a lot of these people personally, they really think the economy is doing great. They don't understand. They ask me, I tell them why I think it's a disaster. They have no refutation. They have no argument about it. They do, by the way, what Scott Bessent, our Treasury Secretary, does. Every time somebody asks him a difficult question, he says, look at the stock market. Well, yeah, the stock market, but that's an idiot answer. That's all that does to a person with half a brain is to say, gee, how is it possible that the mass of the people keep answering every questionnaire? The economy is a disaster. The economy is a problem. Why does the party out of power make affordability its number one issue? Because that's going to get the votes, you idiot. So why would the stock markets going up be a sign of a healthy economy, given all? How are you going to? They have no explanation. They simply want you to believe that what happens in the stock market reflects and is a good measure of the well being of the economy. Now, as a professor, I can tell you that's never true. All right, they don't know that, they don't study the subject, but the simple assumption is a sign that you don't even know enough to worry about the question, why is this happening? It is very, very serious. And I know there's a complicated relationship between India and China, and always has been, and I understand that. But the impact here in the United States so far has been the consciousness of Americans is that somehow China is the issue. The politicians have so far focused on China. Now, partly that's because they're run by a communist party, and Americans have been taught to be fearful about communism for my whole lifetime. But it's also the fact that Chinese goods are everywhere. That when you go to a store here to pick up a vest, it says on the back, made in China. The automobiles that are threatening to come and that now already exist in Mexico and Canada. Canada just signed an agreement to let BYD bring in 50,000 cars a year. That's the end. Americans are going to go to Canada. It's a few hours by car from where I'm sitting to go to Canada. They're going to see the BYD. They're going to want them here, and they're going to bring the tariff. By the way, in the United States right now on BYD, 100%. So if you want to buy a BYD car for $30,000, the 30,000 will go to China to pay for the car. Another 100%, have to be paid to Uncle Sam for you to get. So nobody buys it. Everybody buys other cars that are cheaper. So, but that's not a sustainable arrangement. And look, 2 days ago, I assume this is known in India as well. 2 days ago, Trump called Putin and asked him for help in dealing with the war in Iran. Now you really have to, yeah, you have to smile. You have to say, but that's how desperate it is. That's how desperate. The Russians reported it. They found it amusing. In the United States, almost no word, no coverage at all, because it destroys the image of being adequate by yourself. So I
Well,
do think, one last point, I do think that you're also seeing a a change in the consciousness of the American working class. There is, I don't want to take it too far, I don't want to overstate it, but there is the beginning of what we all knew would eventually come, but now there are real signs of a working class that is conscious of itself as a working class and is conscious that the government is controlled and owned by by another class. Now, it's still identified with people like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett, so it's symbolic, but it's there, and it explains, for example, why in the city I live in, work in, New York City, we just elected by a lot a socialist Muslim to be the mayor of this city. That is, if you had asked me, a year ago, is that possible? I would have told you no, that's not possible. And I think that I had to learn that the working class and you're seeing it in strikes across the country. You're seeing it in a Democratic Party that is really nothing to do with the working class, pushes the working class away as much as it can, really is the party of Clinton and all of that. They had to make affordability their issue because they have no chance if they can't hold on to the working class. And that's giving, here they're called progressives. Socialists inside the Democratic Party are having opportunities they have not had for 50 years.
The strength of American industrial economy died once General Motors and Ford realized that it was easier to make profit by selling insurance than to sell cars. I'm borrowing something from Greta Krippner, by the way.
Yes.
And yeah, on the oil market conditions, an article, and to connect with what you said about analysts having no idea about what the economy looks like. They have no reputations, but they continue to believe that it's working great, perhaps because their wealth has been rising, because they are hooked into that 10% or maybe even 1%. But on the oil conditions, one columnist, I don't think it was Martin Wolff. He had a different article, but one of them, he wrote that, well, for the U.S. economy on the whole, it's not much of a worry that oil price has risen so much. And his argument was that because the U.S. is a net exporter of oil. I mean, that's the level of abstraction to which they would raise without talking about the distributional effect of the whole thing. I mean, yes, the oil, some of the oil barons will make more money because the crude oil price has gone up, and some of them would export, and the refineries would make more money because they would eventually raise the gasoline prices and the retail prices. But on the whole, the distributional impact of this inflation would be enormously against the working class. Uh, so I wanted to ask you, maybe you can comment on that, but uh, what do you think should be the strategy of the American working people at this moment, given we have seen something historic, and this has not been stressed by a lot of people, but you noticed it. I have been talking about it, which is that this war has been highly unpopular right from the get-go. I mean, even the U.S. War on Iraq, the occupation on Iraq, we saw huge mobilizations, but on the whole, it started to become unpopular only gradually once the resistance started inflicting body bags, and body bags were coming home. But this war has been unpopular right from the get-go. So as someone hooked into the Marxian culture, or any culture for that moment, that think about people at large should ask the question about what should we do, what can be done. So what's your thought about what should the working class do, how should they organize, what are some of the places where they should look towards?
Well, I'm very glad you asked the question because it allows me to give you the answer as I see it. The American working class has made great strides conceptually in breaking away from the notion that capitalism is a classless system, an argument made very strongly in the 20th century in this country. It was one of the ways the capitalist class reacted against the Great Depression and the rise of a big left in America. They went to work ideologically. We don't have classes. Everybody can become rich. Everybody is struggling to become rich, and it's up to you to realize the potential you have. We don't have classes, number one. Number two, we are all equal. And number three, this is the best system human beings have ever created, and therefore, you, even if you're not yet rich, stay with it, work hard, and you will become rich. I cannot exaggerate because I don't know how this goes down with your audience. I cannot exaggerate how important that way of thinking became. Every newspaper, every politician, every corporate leader, every professor, every school teacher taught that ideology. If you didn't teach it, you were fired. So you taught it, and there was nothing else. If I understand revolutionary movements, you need two things. You need a working class that has lost faith in the government, right? And doesn't see anyone or anything worth supporting. So they are now ready for an alternative. And you have to give them not the details, no guarantees. People aren't stupid, but you have to have it. We are the people who reject the status quo and who affirm we can do better, and here's how we will do it. So leave this system and support us moving the system forward. We now have an alienated working class willing to listen to alternatives, willing to reject. Two-thirds of Americans hate Mr. Trump. They don't just dislike him. They ridicule him. They hate him. They refer to him as a liar all the time in public. Okay, so we've gone a long way. And the Democrats are not liked at all. They may win the next election, but they win it for the same reason Trump won it. That Mr. Biden was so bleh, that people, working class people, voted for Trump, as the French would say, faute de mieux, for lack of something better. You know. All right. So what is it that the working class needs to do? It needs to recognize, which it has not yet done, that the basic image of what it means to be a post-capitalist or an anti-capitalist or a socialist or a communist, it doesn't matter, that basic image has been, for all kinds of complicated reasons, rendered ineffective. It was, in the 19th century, it was very effective. Even into the 20th century, it was very effective. It isn't effective now. What do I mean? The notion that the problems of capitalism are going to be solved by giving the responsibility and the power and the ownership to the government, the state. The mass of the working people in the United States do not believe that, and I don't think they will. You have to give them a different. You may include that the state will do all kinds of things. Sure, that's fine. And you may make arguments why the state is the appropriate agent to do those things. That's fine too. But that cannot be your image of what we're fighting for, the way it was in the 19th and 20th century. You have to come up, I know this is difficult, with another way of encapsulating the vision of what comes next. And it has to be a vision that people say, yes, this would be better, better for the country, better for me. And so I'm going, yeah, now I see it's worth it to risk something here and now to get to that other thing. And I will tell you what I think it is, that other thing, that new vision. It has to be a socialism grounded at the micro level, not just the macro. Don't keep talking to me about the government, the macro picture. I want you to have a vision that is at least equally, if not more, focused on the micro. And what do I mean? Well, you know my work. It is worker cooperatives. It is reorganizing the factory, the office, and the store so that it becomes a democratic community engaged in production. One person, one vote. We decide democratically what to produce, what technology to use, where to carry out the production, and what to do with the revenue. It is no longer acceptable to have a employer class. That's gone. They're gone. Employers and employees are going to become the same people. Now, all I can tell you is I go around the United States arguing for what I just said, sometimes in great detail, sometimes in broad generalities. I know the audience is there for it. You know, we started doing this 15 years ago. So now we have 600,000 YouTube followers. Not bad in the United States for a weekly anti communist, excuse me, anti capitalist program. You know, a program that argues we can go. And I have loads of guests, and I pull them from all over the United States because they are interested in this. It's a movement, still small, absolutely, but it is there. And it is arguing that it offers a an important part of the movement forward in and for socialism, of a vision that can be more effective than continuing to tell people who have already tried to give the government a much bigger role and don't see, and they're right, that it made the kind of difference they had been led to believe it would. You can't take them down that road twice. We've got to offer some. That means we have to disengage ourselves from the image of the state as the solution. A few months before Lenin died, he gave a very famous speech. And he said, we have accomplished much. We made a revolution and we put the working class in charge of the government. But what that gave us was a working class state on a capitalist base, state capitalism. We now have to take the next step. And he talked about worker co ops. And then he had an aneurysm and he died. So we'll never know. But he understood it too. And that might be a clue why we ought to think at least about it more than we have.
I miss Professor Patnaik in this conversation because, as you were talking about what is to be done within the imperial core to reconstruct a world, the brink of which we are definitely in. I was thinking about the parallel question about what is to be done in the global south and the rest of the world, and we have been having this conversation. and it ties up with a lot of things that you've said. For instance, the raising up of the military budget from 900 something billion US dollar to 1.5 trillion dollar would have enormous impact on the global south, because printing out of so much dollar and flooding the global south with that dollar with specific trajectories, they would have to suck that dollar up if they would have to keep the belief, and for that, uh, the belief about the hegemony of American investments have to be there. I mean, in these entrepreneurship meetings, one in Singapore, leading entrepreneurs were asked that how many of you actually hold dollar assets, and I think there was not a single exception among 500 top investors that that gathered in Singapore. And uh, that empire based around dollar would collapse once that belief is gone. That's a fake belief, of course. It's like the belief in God, but that belief is strong. It's extremely strong, and as long as that belief goes on, the dollar survives. And so how to build alternatives, and these are relevant discussions. As I was looking about the oil data, one of the striking things about China, not just about how it has ramped up its strategic reserves very quickly in an unprecedented way, but how it has doubled its import from the BRICS plus country, BRICS, not I from India, but Iran. So basically, Brazil, Russia, and Iran, its import from these three countries have gone up. And at the domestic exploration, along with that, China has much higher energy security than, let's say, India. And this brings us to these questions about, as we navigate through these final phases, what should be done in the rest of the global south. Maybe we need a whole episode between Professor Pravat Patnaik and you on that. I want to close by asking you a simple question, because I want to be respectful about your time, which is, if you could communicate directly to Iranians at large. We have been doing this because we have had many Iranian professors on our show, not one, but more. And what we are hearing is that Iranians don't hate Americans, they hate US foreign policy in West Asia and in Iran. But generations of Americans have been now fooled to believe by the mainstream media that Iranians hate Americans, and slogans like death to America, which is actually death to American foreign policy, is a shorthand, has been completely miscommunicated. So just as Iranians don't hate Americans, and most Americans probably shouldn't hate Iranians, so we are in a situation where probably a lot, given the unpopularity of the war, a lot of Americans wouldn't hate Iranians, and of course the reverse is true. But we still have a war. So if Iranians are watching this program, what would be your message as an American?
Well, as an American, I want the war to stop. I am horrified that I pay taxes like every other American to the government that uses that money in part to kill people in Iran. I don't think killing people in Iran solves any of the basic problems this country has. I think the argument, and by the way, the argument why Americans can be persuaded, if that's the right word, to be hostile towards Iranians. And I think most Americans, if confronted with an Iranian person, would not exhibit those. That's all very abstract, and it's abstract in a particular way. Iranians are portrayed as other, as different. So, for example, they are portrayed as Islamic, which they are, right? But for many Americans, the image of Islam is the image of someone who's going to throw a bomb into your shop next week, or someone who's going to do something awful, which has been hyped in the press here extraordinarily. There was give you an example. Yesterday, the police here in New York arrested three or four young men outside of the residence of the mayor. They said that they were part of ISIS and they wanted to kill the mayor. By the way, the mayor is an Islamic, is a Muslim too. It doesn't make much sense, but it's in the newspaper every day. You associate Islam with everything frightening you can possibly do. This is a country that is better at doing that, or if you like, worse at doing that than most other countries. Now, I know, given the little bit I know about Muslim Hindu troubles over the years, you may not need to hear what I'm about to say. But my parents are European. My father was French, my mother German. I speak those languages, but I'm an American. I was born here, I'm an American. I first understood this, and I'll tell you a very quick story. There's a village in Massachusetts near where I work that has a historic section where the first settlers, Europeans, came back in the 17th century and settled in this little village by a river. And they've restored the houses to the way they looked when they were first built in the 17th century. And there are little plaques in front of the houses, give you a little thumbnail history, if for a tourist. So I go up and I read it. And here's what it says. In this house in 1723, the savages attacked us. And with great nobility, Zeke and Louise fought off the savages. Everyone. And I remember thinking to myself, the people living here had been living here in peace for thousands of years until the Europeans came, took their land, took their animals, hurt many of them in war. And the people coming call the Indians savages. You know, this would Sigmund Freud would have a field day with it. This is called projection. You can't handle the horrible in yourself, so you project it onto the other. This country has been doing. That's why we have half of the reason why we have our racial problems. White people continue to load their horror onto people whose skin is brown or black. It's a cultural disease that's very rampant in these countries. It has to be overcome by a massive program of re-education. There is no that I can't. It has to be prohibit. You have to, in the school and everywhere else, constantly talk about the bad consequences of thinking like that and the better results for you in your life for being open to the different cultures and the different ways of thinking, that this is a richness. It's like going from a diet that has nothing but lentils all day, and now a diet in which you can flavor the lentils with a piece of fish or a vegetable, or you're training. That has to be done. And if you don't do that, this disease reproduces itself in the population. We cannot look at this. This government, Mr. Trump, is actively reviving white supremacy and all of that. Really systematically doing the opposite. And the problem is getting worse. There's no question in my mind it's getting worse. The ability to demonize the immigrant. I mean, think about it. This is a country which killed all the native people, wiped them out, ethnic cleansing. You know, if you ever come to the United States, you may visit a quote unquote reservation. We still have a few of those. They are horrible, terrible. They have the worst incidence of alcoholism and disease, and they're basically, we kill them all. So we're a nation of immigrants whose politics today is the demonization of the latest immigrants. You know, you have to be very sick to do that sort of thing. You have to have been taught in a systematic way the legitimacy. We have a special secret police. You've heard about it, right? Called ICE. It's a secret state police. In German, the word secret state police is Geheim Staatspolizei. And if you take the first two letters, Gestapo, we have now a Gestapo here to hound immigrants, separate the parents from the children, put them in unbelievable bad, dr- drive them out of the country. I mean, it is, and it does a bad job on disunifying the working class. And one of the people should understand one of the forces that supports the demonization of immigrants is the capitalist class, because the immigrants were in the forefront of many labor struggles, and getting them out of the American labor movement in the minds of some employers is a solution to their problem. What they don't understand, because they're not Marxists, they don't understand that the American working class, having been trained to demand higher wages than these immigrants, will not work at the jobs those immigrants are leaving. And so they now have a problem. And they're hoping that AI will solve their problem by getting rid of these. But that would make the mass of the white working class redundant. And that's what they fear. And that's also an opportunity for the left.
In one of my interviews with Juan Gonzalez, the co-host of Democracy Now, we went through parts of labor history in the US, and he did talk about how the American labor unions actually did very well through a series of struggles to become more inclusive. I mean, they began by being extremely racist and exclusive. I mean, they started off as Irish unions, German unions, and so on and so forth. But gradually, he said that they actually did very well to go out off ramp from the racial bag, and Trump administration is doing everything it could to turn back that history to divide working class along racial grounds. um, Professor Wolff, I'll leave it there. This was a fascinating conversation. It doesn't feel like stopping, but I need to be respectful about your time. Thank you so much.
I, I,
Yes.
I hope Professor Padnaik is okay.
Yes, he is okay. Actually, I had some difficulties in the last month or so, and so I did very few shows. But I would soon restart those conversations, and we are also doing more shows now. So yes, we are soon going to restart those
I,
conversations.
as I've told you before, I think that these programs that you make are very, very important. Getting this material out is crucial, more than anything I can think of at this point. The audience is there, the social need is there, the historical moment is there, and
Absolutely,
it's on us if we don't take advantage of it.
totally. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of the day ahead. Take care.
Same for you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.